I've been sat here for a while trying to figure out how to start this video, so I just hit record. At the time of recording, it's Pride Month, and Pride Month is a very, very important time. It's important for me, especially right now, as a newly out queer person. I've been exploring my gender identity now for 2 or 3 years, and as a confidently out non-binary person, it is a very, very exciting time. But I also recently came out as pansexual, which cleared up a lot of things in me, honestly. Things that I think I'd always known were there, things that I just didn't need to think about. For me, the thing about coming out as pansexual was that I didn't have to address it because I am male passing and I love women. And so I can just keep doing that. It's act like it's normal. That's my status quo. But it's not. I'm pansexual and I'm non-binary and I'm very, very happy. And so I want to make this list now for myself and also for Pride Month and also for every reader out there who wants to read more queer books. On our website there is a list of 15 books. This list is probably a little bit shorter than 15, maybe 10. Let's crack on. This is a list of some really great LGBTQ books from all around the world, all about queerness in some way, shape or form. Not all of the writers are queer, but most of them are. Let's go. I'm going to start off at home in the West with my favourite book of 2021 that was not in translation. So far at least, but probably pretty set in stone by this point. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. Tori Peters is an American trans woman based in New York City, Brooklyn specifically, and this is a very, very, very important book for me, for a lot of trans people, for a lot of non-binary people, for a lot of queer people, and just for a lot of people. It's a fucking great book. If you haven't read Detransition Baby yet, I'd be surprised. It's everywhere. And every time I go into a bookshop, I see that it has sold out and my heart flutters, especially because I live in a very transphobic, turfy country right now, and the fact that I just keep seeing that this book is sold out brings me a lot of joy. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize and it did not make the shortlist, but I'm going to create a headcanon where it won the Women's Prize. Detransition Baby tells the story of 2 trans people. One is a trans woman and another is a man who has detransitioned, and it is about their previous relationship while they were a lesbian couple and their relationship now as he has entered into a male-female relationship with his boss, and his ex-girlfriend, the trans woman, is pulled into this relationship in a very strange love triangle that revolves around trying to build a family, having a child, and raising a child as 3 people. It's a 21st century story of relationships and love and sisterhood in some ways that bucks every kind of conservative trend and shows that the typical ways that relationships blossom and grow and change and shift and just exist, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't exist anymore for a lot of people. Detransition Baby rewrites the rules of heteronormativity and the system. And I love that. This is a very, very important book to me. It's a very important book to a lot of people. And I guess it's become kind of the quintessential transgender novel for a lot of people. Written by a trans woman, about trans women, and the struggles that they go through. It's very, very bleakly funny in places, and it's also bleakly dark in places, and it is my favourite book of this year, not in translation. Keep going with the pink theme. This is another book that I have an entire video about, and it's 100 Boyfriends by Bronte Purnell. Bronte Purnell is a gay black writer from California, and this is a collection of 25 very, very darkly funny, to the point that you feel guilty for laughing because it's so dark, it's such black comedy. Stories about queerness, gay relationships, gay romance, gay sex. I've already done a full video on it, so I won't go on too much here. In fact, I'm not going to go on at all. Watch my video. But 100 Boyfriends by Bronte Purnell is absolutely wonderful. You will laugh until you cry, and then cry because you feel guilty for laughing, because these jokes are dark. And it's not entirely funny, it's not entirely comedy, it's really tragic, it's a huge spectrum of emotion, but it's absolutely wonderful. And it's pretty horny and it's pretty sexy as well. Okay, because I have it on me and because it's also American and everything I've done so far is American, let's keep going with that. This is Memorial by Brian Washington. Brian Washington had a short story collection out first, that's where he started, and this is his debut novel. This is a review copy, which is why it looks like this. I've done a video on this as well, where I was chopping vegetables for the whole video. I don't know why I did that. Memorial is a love story of a different sort. It's more a relationship story. Kind of like the movie Marriage Story is about a divorce. This is about a relationship on the rocks. It is about a mixed race gay couple in Texas. One is a black man, the other is a Japanese migrant, and the book begins with the Japanese man having to go home to Osaka because his father is dying and they are estranged and he wants to make amends and see his dad before he dies. But just as he leaves, his mum arrives and she has come all the way to Texas to see him and tell him about the dad, etc. But he says, sorry mum, gotta go see dad, he's dying. And so the mum stays in Texas and becomes an awkward housemate to the boyfriend. And it's kind of split in half in that way. Half of it is set in Texas, and the other half is in Osaka. And the two are ruminating on their relationship and how they're doing by this point, how they came together in the first place, and how they are as individuals apart from each other. It's a really dynamic story, and it's very raw and visceral, and it's funny in places, dark in places. It's kind of a running theme with a lot of gay American literature these days, and it's great. It's really, really great. Check it out. Let's move into stuff that is in translation, not written in English. This is The Membranes, which is really hard to hold up because it's so shiny. I recently finished reading this, and it's the reason I'm making this video now, I guess. The Membranes is a Taiwanese novel by Chi Ta-wei. It's translated by Ari Larissa Heinrich, which is an amazing name. And this is a book that's pretty old by this point. It was originally published in Taiwan in 1995. There is an essay at the back of this book that talks about how punk Taiwan was in the 90s, which is something I didn't know. I love Taiwan. I've mentioned this before in videos. I really love Taiwan. It's one of my favorite countries in the world, and I love a lot of Taiwanese literature. I love traveling around Taiwan. I would live and retire in Taiwan. It's such a great place. And in the 90s, Taiwan was a really punk place where anything felt possible, and the art scene and the literature scene was more progressive than it was in the West. And this is something that's not really talked about. So as I said, Ari Larissa Heinrich wrote an essay that's at the back, and it tells you all about the context behind this book. If you get this, if you read it, please check out the essay. It's so great, but it does spoil the book, so read the book first. The Membranes is a speculative science fiction novel with a heavily queer bent to it. It's set in the end of the 21st century. The ozone layer's gone, and all of humanity lives in bubble cities at the bottom of the ocean, like in BioShock. And this is to protect them from the sun. The sun has scorched the entire Earth, and everyone has to live at the bottom of the sea. The protagonist is a woman called Momo. She's named after the Japanese word for peaches. And she was raised by a mother who tells her the story of her birth, which was that she burst out from a peach, which is an old folk tale. And it's made clear that even though she was raised by one woman, it was originally the choice of two women. They were in it's not explicitly a lesbian relationship, but they are two friends who decide to have a child together, so it's bucking heteronormative trends. And I cannot tell you in detail why or the context for this because it will spoil a lot of things. I can't tell you the how and why, but I can, I think, comfortably tell you that Momo is arguably, I think, the first transgender character in a Chinese novel, which is absolutely huge. Chi Ta-wei, the author, is queer, not transgender, but is a scholar of queer studies, queer literature, etc. And Momo is a fascinating example of transgenderness on a philosophical level. You'll see what I mean when I get there. I cannot go into detail. But Momo is a dermal care technician, which is a job that I can't really explain. You'll see it when you get to it. But she has clients who come to her for certain services, and these clients are quite famous, a lot of them are really well-known people. The main bulk of the story is about her relationship with her mum, which is really strained. They haven't spoken in 20 years, and she's now 30 years old. And a lot of the story is about her childhood. She was a very, very sick child. She had to undergo multiple surgeries. She had a childhood friend who vanished one day. And I'm just going to give you these pieces and tell you to check it out. It's a fascinating science fiction novel. It's very queer, it's very punk. And the way that it talks about transgenderness is not explicit. It is metaphorical in a sense. It is philosophical. It is very deep and is political. It's a lot of things. It's a very important piece of Taiwanese fiction, and it has instantly become one of my favorite Taiwanese novels. Please check it out. Right, this is the last book that I actually have on me from the list. The others are elsewhere, who knows where. This is To the Warm Horizon. This is a Korean novel by Choi Jin-young, translated from Korean to English by Sojay. It's published by Honford Star, and you've heard me talk about Homford Star before if you watch my channel often. I love what they do. They are great. They publish a lot of Korean books in translation, and their covers are always gorgeous. Next month, I'll be reviewing another one of their new books, translated by Anton Her, one of my favorite people in the world. To the Warm Horizon is Cormac McCarthy's The Road, but gay. I don't know if saying that kind of diminishes its importance as a novel in and of itself, but it's nice to have a kind of baseline comparison. And The Road is a very famous novel. So if that's a bit mean of me to do that, I'm sorry. Anyway, I can't help but waffle a little bit in this video because I guess I'm kind of nervous. To the Warm Horizon is a really, really great Korean novel, and it's set in a world that's a little close to home right now because a pandemic has wiped out a lot of people, and a lot of Koreans have decided to just hit the road and go somewhere. And it follows two young women. One is a member of a family who've created this kind of caravan and have traveled through Korea into Russia and are currently traveling across Siberia as a big family unit. The other is a young Korean woman who has a mute sister. Her parents have died. I think they're killed by the virus, and she is now responsible for her deaf-mute little sister. And these two young women meet, and their meeting is difficult and strained because of the one young woman's family, but eventually they enter into a lesbian romance. And it's quite twee in places, in a nice way. I like twee. It's quite twee, quite sweet, but it's also very, very brutal because it's set in a pseudo-post-apocalyptic world where people are killing and looting and threatening and fighting, and law has pretty much been abandoned. But it is at its heart a lesbian love story from Korea, and that's really, really cool. And it's also post-apocalyptic and set in the snowy wastes of Siberia, which adds a lot of atmosphere to it. To the Warm Horizon is well worth checking out. Alright, I'm going to rattle off a few more. I don't have physical copies of these, as I said. Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. Megan Backus translated this way back in the 90s, I think, and her translation has come under a lot of fire for not being very good, but it was one of the first books in translation I ever read. I didn't know anything about the controversy about her translation. I don't care about it, and I haven't read it since, and I might see it with a new eye now, but when I read it, I really loved it. Kitchen is about a hetero love story between a young man and a young woman, but what makes it queer is the fact that the young man's mother is a trans woman, and in 1989, when this was written, in Japan, in a very conservative world, having a very fleshed out trans woman as a main character was a really, really big deal, and it still is. What's also really important about this is that being trans isn't her defining characteristic. It's an important aspect of her life, but she is more than that. She is more than being a token trans person. She is a wonderful mother with a dynamic sensibility, and of course, because she's trans, she has some tragedy in her life. And you just can't seem to avoid that in fiction, unfortunately. Banana Yoshimoto is not trans. She is not queer, I don't think, in any way, but she has written a really great trans woman character, especially in the late 80s, where trans representation boiled down to very, very offensive films. And Banana Yoshimoto is one of my favorite Japanese authors. She tackles the themes of love and death better than any writer ever. So check out Kitchen, it's her most famous book. From Latin America, I really need to give a shout out to The Adventures of China Iron. Probably one of my two favorite novels that I've read from Argentina. I love The Adventures of China Iron. There's a lot to unpack with this book in terms of its context and its history, and I'm rusty on it because I haven't read it in a while, and there's so much backstory to it, like literary, historical backstory. You can find a written review of it on our website, and you can read our list of this list for more details about it. But it's an incredible novel. And again, it is a lesbian romance. The Adventures of China Iron was written by Gabriela Cabezon Camara. It was translated by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre together. I'm not sure how they handled translation duty together, but they did. What I love so much about this book is partly it is historical fiction, and I love historical fiction, but also the fact that it's a lesbian romance that is so hedonistic. This isn't just a lesbian romance, this is a unshackling of the bonds and binds of heteronormativity, of patriarchy, and two women celebrating love and sex and freedom in every sense. It's about a young woman who has already gone through pregnancy and had to give up her child and been married to an abusive musician who left, and she's on the road and she's lost and she's empty and she's exhausted, and she's picked up by this Scottish woman with a horse and carriage driving through the wilds of Argentina, and they go out on an adventure together. And from here, the book is kind of set in 3 acts, and it pulls apart patriarchy, it pulls apart empire, and it just sticks needles and pins and swords and knives in the backs of every kind of white, cishet, heteronormative societal standard. It is a celebration of lesbian love, of queerness, of physical freedom, of not being shackled by any of the societal expectations that we put on each other. Things like marriage and work and living in a house in a city. It's about freedom and hedonism. It is a fun, sexy, horny, lovely, funny, exuberant novel all about freedom. Queer freedom specifically. I love China Iron so much. This one is actually non-fiction, but it's published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, and Fitzcarraldo are fucking awesome. This is An Apartment on Uranus. It's written by Paul B. Preciado. Paul is a trans guy. He speaks French and Spanish, and I think this was written in French, and it was translated by Charlotte Mandel. And I'm sure she's a French to English translator, so yeah, French. It's a collection of essays. This collection of essays is about being a trans guy, but it's also about Marxism and socialism. It's about our current society. It's about a lot of things. And it roughly follows a chronological diary from one particular month of one year to another a few years later. It's got this period of time that it's exploring, and it's a lot about being trans, but it's a lot about other things too. It's a very, very philosophical text. Paul B. Preciado is an astonishingly intelligent academic. I'm very jealous of his mind. The collection also moves from place to place as well as time to time. I think it starts in 2013 until 2018, something like that. And it goes from, Paris to New York to other parts of Europe to other parts of the US. It goes around a lot of places, and it's about a lot of experiences and how Paul ties those experiences up into his gender, his sexuality, his observations of our current political situation, our political climate. It's a very fascinating and eye-opening collection of essays, and I hugely recommend it. As a non-binary writer and reader, I want to mention a non-binary writer and reader, and that is Isabel Weidner. They are a German non-binary writer who is based in the UK, and I've talked about them recently. I'm going to be doing a review of their latest book very, very soon, but this is We Are Made of Diamond Stuff. It was published by Dostoevsky Wannabe about 2 years ago, and it made the long list for the Goldsmiths Prize, and the shortlist, I think, for the Goldsmiths Prize. Isabel Weidner is an incredible writer, and this is a book about the state of queerness and being a migrant. It's about political dichotomies. Those political dichotomies exist everywhere, within the queer world, race, class, gender, sexuality, everything. It is about political divides, but it's all set in a hotel on the Isle of Wight. I think the Isle of Wight. It's a really amazing, tiny, tiny little, slightly surreal and strange book about being non-binary, about being queer, about the migrant situation in the UK. So in a way, it's an anti-Brexit book. It's an anti-fascist book. It's an anti-a-lot of things book. There's a lot going on in We Are Made of Diamond Stuff. Check it out. On this list, I've tried to explore every aspect of queerness to the best of my ability. So I've mentioned gay and lesbian stories. I've mentioned a non-binary writer, I've mentioned 2 trans writers, a trans man and a trans woman, and one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which I'm going to now, is asexual people. I am very close to a lot of ace people, and being ace is very, very important to me, even though I am not ace. I am a very horny person. This is Alice Oseman's Loveless. This is a YA novel. Alice Oseman is a British writer from Kent, I think, and this book is partly inspired by her own life. I have done an entire video about this book and the importance of representation, which you can check out. I made the video a while ago, so the quality isn't as good. Loveless is the story of a young woman who goes off to university in the north. Durham University, one of the really good ones. She goes to Durham, and she is pressured into romance and sex and all the things that we explore when we're at university, but she's confused because she feels very, very differently. A lot of her friends are queer, she joins the queer society, there is a non-binary character in there, which was very important for me when I read it. There's a lot of the spectrum of sexuality and gender going on in here, which is great for representation, but our protagonist is still confused because she's still not really seeing herself reflected in this huge spectrum of queerness because she's asexual. And asexuality is criminally underexplored and underrepresented in fiction, in literature, in the media in general. In fact, ace people come under fire all the time by the queer community, and it's very, very pathetic and upsetting and distressing. I don't read a lot of YA, and this is YA, but it's really lovely. It's a really well-written book, and Alice Oseman is a delight when it comes to queer representation in her books, and I really enjoyed Loveless. As I said, I've tried to cover as many aspects of the queer spectrum as I possibly can, LGBTQ books of every sort, and I've tried to cover a few books from a few different places, Taiwan, Korea, Argentina, etc. I think I've covered 10 books here, and the list that we have on our website is 15 books, so please go see it and you'll see a few more books that I've missed out here for the sake of brevity. Thank you for listening to me at the beginning talk about my sexuality and my gender. These are things that I really like to talk about because they're really exciting to me. It feels like it's happened quite late in life that I've come to understand my gender and my sexuality a little bit more, and I'm still not all the way there. It's a journey. I've talked about it before, I'll talk about it again. Happy Pride Month, read some great books, and subscribe for books.